Historical Address by President George A. Smith, delivered in the New Tabernacle, Salt Lake City, October 8, 1868. Reported by David W. Evans. The circumstances by which we are surrounded are such as to cause feeling of no ordinary character. In all the conferences held hitherto in this city and in Nauvoo, we have enjoyed the society of our late lamented President, Heber C. Kimball, and his being called away from a useful field in which he had long labored should remind us that each of us, at any moment, may be called to close our career here for time, and to await our reward in the resurrection. We can but rejoice that our brother, in his long life and labors in the church, was a pattern of humility, faith, and diligence, and was instrumental in the hands of God in bringing many thousands to a knowledge of the truth. The blow which has fallen upon us, being deprived of his company, counsel, and instruction, should remind us of the necessity of diligence in the discharge of all our duties, that, like him, we may be prepared to inherit celestial glory, and to associate with Joseph and Hiram Smith and David Patton, and the martyrs who have gone before. The incidents that have been brought to our notice by our brethren who have spoken during the conference give rise to a series of reflections in relation to our early history as a people, which, I presume, it would be well for us all to review. There are some in this territory who have been in the church 36, 37, or 38 years, but a great many of the people have been in only a few years. A very large portion of our population have been reared here, and consequently a brief sketch of the early incidents of our history may not be unprofitable to any. When Joseph Smith took the plates of Mormon from the hill Cumorah, he was immediately surrounded by enemies, and though he was a young man of unexceptional character, he was compelled to go from place to place, while translating the work, to avoid persecution. The press and the pulpit denounced him as an impostor and his followers as dupes. As soon as he preached the doctrine of baptism for the remission of sins and organized a church with 6 members, he was arrested and brought before a magistrate, honorably discharged by him, and immediately arrested again, and hurried into an adjoining county, where he was insulted, spit upon, and kept without food during the day, and then given crusts of bread and water. The next day he was taken before magistrates, who, after a rigid examination, found no fault in him. A mob resolved to tar and feather him, but through the instrumentality of the constable who previously treated him roughly, but who now became his friend, he made his escape in safety. All these proceedings were instigated by clergymen and professors of religion in high standing. A similar spirit of persecution was manifested in a greater or less degree in every place where the gospel was proclaimed, not only against Joseph Smith, but also against other elders who preached the word. The system of persecution continued, especially in the shape of vexatious lawsuits, numbering some 50 in all, up to the day of his death, and in all of which a most vicious and vindictive spirit was manifested outside of judicial questions. In every case he was honorably acquitted, and upon the charge of treason, upon which he was detained in Carthage jail when murdered, he had not even been lawfully examined before a magistrate. In all these trials except one, he had been before persons religiously opposed to him. His enemies were his judges, and all this while, in every act of his life, was prompted by a firm desire to do good to his fellow men, to preach the gospel of peace, to magnify the high and holy calling he had received from the Lord, and thereby lead back to the ancient faith of Jesus Christ his fellow beings who had fallen into darkness. Vexatious lawsuits not accomplishing the work to the satisfaction of the persecutors of the saints, mob violence was resorted to as being more effective. On the 25th day of March, 1832, in Hiram, Portage County, Ohio, Joseph Smith was dragged from his bed and carried to the woods, daubed with tar and feathers, and otherwise ill-treated. The following is his account of the outrage. On the 25th of March, the twins before mentioned, which had been sick for some time with the measles, caused us to be broke of our rest in taking care of them, especially my wife. In the evening I told her she had better retire to rest with one of the children, and I would watch the sickest child. In the night she told me I had better lie down on the trundle bed, and so I did so, and was soon after awoke by her screaming, "Murder!" when I found myself going out from the door in the hands of about a dozen men, some of whose hands were in my hair, and some had hold of my shirt, drawers, and limbs. The foot of the trundle bed was towards the door, leaving only room enough for the door to swing. My wife heard a gentle tapping on the windows, which she then took no particular notice of, but which was unquestionably designed for ascertaining whether we were all asleep. And soon after the mob burst open the door and surrounded the bed in an instant, and, as I said, the first I knew, I was going out of the door in the hands of an infuriated mob. I made a desperate struggle as I was forced out to extricate myself, but only cleared one leg, with which I made a pass at one man, and he fell on the doorsteps. I was immediately confined again, and they swore by God they would kill me if I would not be still, which quieted me. As they passed around the house with me, the fellow that I kicked came to me and thrust his hand into my face, all covered with blood, for I had hit him on the nose, and with an exulting hoarse laugh, muttered, Gee, God damn you, I'll fix you. They then seized me by the throat and held on till I lost my breath. After I came to, as they passed along with me about 30 rods from the house, I saw Elder Rigdon stretched out on the ground, whither they had dragged him by the heels. I supposed he was dead. I began to plead with them, saying, You will have mercy and spare my life, I hope, to which they replied, God damn you, calling your God for help. We'll show you no mercy. And the people began to show themselves in every direction. One coming from the orchard had a plank, and I expected they would kill me and carry me off on the plank. They then turned to the right and went on about 30 rods further, about 60 rods from the house, and 30 from where I saw Elder Rigdon, into the meadow, where they stopped, and one said, Simons, meaning, I suppose, Simon's rider. Pull up his drawers, he will take cold. Another replied, Ain't you going to kill him? When a group of mobbers collected a little way off and said, Simons, come here. And Simons charged those who had hold of me to keep me from touching the ground, as they had all the time done, lest I should get a spring upon them. They went and held a council, and, as I could occasionally overhear a word, I suppose it was to know whether it was best to kill me. They returned after a while, when I heard that they had concluded not to kill me, but pound and scratch me well, tear off my shirt and drawers, and leave me naked. One cried, Simons, where's the tar bucket? I don't know, answered one, where 'tis Eli's left it. They ran back and fetched the bucket of tar, when one exclaimed, God damn it, let us tar up his mouth, and they tried to force a tar paddle into my mouth. I twisted my head around so they could not, and they cried out, God damn you, hold you's head and let us give you some tar. They then tried to force a vial into my mouth, and I broke it with my teeth. All of my clothes were torn off me except my shirt collar, and one man fell on me and scratched my body with his nails like a mad cat, and then muttered out, God damn you, that's the way the Holy Ghost falls on folks. They then left me, and I attempted to rise, but fell again. I pulled the tire away from my lips so I could breathe more freely and raised myself up, when I saw 2 lights. I made my way towards one of them and found it was Father Johnson's. When I had come to the door, I was naked, and the tar made me look as though I was covered with blood. When my wife saw me, she thought I was mashed all to pieces and fainted. During the affray abroad, the sisters of the neighborhood had collected at my room. I called for a blanket, and they threw me one and shut the door. I wrapped it around me and went in. History of Joseph Smith, Millennial Star, Volume 14, page 148. I will add that the exposure of the child above referred to the night air caused its death. This murdered child was doubtless the first martyr of this last dispensation. In a revelation given September 1831, the Lord said, It is my will that the saints retain a stronghold in the land of Kirtland for the space of 5 years. The saints owned several farms in Kirtland. Mr. Lyman, a Presbyterian, also owned a grist mill there, and many of us got our grinding done in his mill, although our brethren owned mills 2 or 3 miles distant. We had commenced building the Kirtland Temple. A portion of the site had been surveyed, and many of the saints who had recently come in were building houses on the lots. Mr. Lyman associated himself with a combination to starve us out. The authorities proceeded to warn all the Latter-day Saints out of the township and formed a compact not to employ us or sell us grain, which was scarce at the time. Mr. Lyman had 3,000 bushels of wheat, but refused to let us have it at any reasonable price, and it was believed we were so destitute of money that we would have to scatter abroad. The warning out of town was designed to prevent our becoming a township charge, the law of Ohio being that if a person who had been warned out of town applied for assistance, he was to be carried to the next town, and so on until he was taken out of the state or the town from which he formerly came. We were obliged to send 50 miles for grain, which cost us $1.06 per bushel, delivered in Kirtland. Mr. Lyman's grain remained unsold, and his effort to starve us taught us better than to longer patronize his mill, although it cost us the trouble of going 2 or 3 miles to mills belonging to our brethren. We built a magnificent temple and a large city. We paid our quota of taxes, and we were as noted and remarkable for our industry, temperance, thrift, and morality there as our people are at the present day. We also patronized a Mr. Lyon, who was a gentlemanly outside merchant, but the moment he got an opportunity, he united with our enemies to oppress us. We sent our children to school to Mr. Bates, a Presbyterian minister, who soon after went into court and bore false witness against the elders and further testified on oath that every Mormon was intellectually insane. This lesson did admonish us not to longer entrust the education of our youth to canting hypocrites. For several years we used the paper at Geauga Bank at Painesville as money. A loan of a few $100s was asked for by Joseph Smith with ample security, but was refused. And Elder Reynolds Cahoon was told that he would not accommodate the Mormon prophet, although they acknowledged the endorser were above question, simply because it would encourage Mormonism. So much of their specie was drawn by Joseph Smith during the 3 succeeding days as greatly improved their tempers, and they said to Elder Cahoon, "Tell Mr. Smith he must stop this, and any favor he wants, we are ready to accord him." Subsequently, application was made to the legislature of the state for a bank charter, and the notes to be redeemed with specie and their redemption secured by real estate. The charter was denied us on the grounds that we were Mormons, and soon a combination of apostates and outsiders caused us to leave Kirtland. The most of our property unsold, and our beautiful temple yet remains a lasting monument of our perseverance and industry. The loss sustained through this persecution was probably not less than $1 million. Missouri. On the 20th day of July, 1831, at Independence, Jackson County, Joseph Smith set apart and dedicated a lot as the site of the temple of the center stake of Zion, ground having been purchased for this purpose and is still known as the Temple Lot. The saints entered lands in different parts of the county, built houses, opened farms, constructed mills, established a printing office, owned by W. Phelps & Co., and the first in western Missouri, and opened a mercantile establishment, the largest in the county, owned by Messrs. Gilbert and Whitney. In July 1833, a mob was organized by signing a circular, which set forth that the civil law did not afford them a sufficient guarantee against the Mormons, whom they accused of blasphemously pretending to heal the sick by the administration of holy oil, and consequently they must be either fanatics or knaves. Under the influence of Methodist, Baptist, and Presbyterian ministers, they tore down the printing office of the Evening and Morning Star, which cost some $6,000. They stripped and tarred and feathered Bishop Partridge and Elder Charles Allen, and seized several other elders and cast them into prison, compelled Gilbert and Whitney to close their store, and soon after broke it open and scattered their goods to the four winds. They tore down 20 houses over the heads of the inmates, and whipped and terribly lacerated with hickory switches many of the elders, killed Andrew Barber, and severely wounded many others, robbed the houses of their property, and finally expelled 1,500 people from the county. They also destroyed some 216 dwellings, and much of the land, being valuable timber land, became public plunder. The saints were robbed of most of their horses, cattle, implements of husbandry, etc. The total loss of these transactions is estimated at $500,000. Horrible to relate, several women thus driven from their homes gave birth to children in the woods and on the prairies, destitute of beds or clothing, having escaped in fright. It is stated on the authority of Solomon Hancock, an eyewitness, that he, with the assistance of 2 or 3 others, protected 120 women and children for the space of 10 days, who were obliged to keep themselves hid from their pursuers, while they were hourly expecting to be massacred, and who finally escaped into Clay County by finding a circuitous route to the ferry. They could be traced by the blood of their feet on the burnt prairie. This occurred in the month of November, and is a specimen of the kindness that law-abiding Latter-day Saints received at the hands of those who had power over them. The saints were so law-abiding that not a single process had been issued against any member of the church in Jackson County up to the organization of the mob, although all the offices, civil and military, were in the hands of their enemies. Prominent in these cruelties as actors and apologists were the Reverends Isaac McCoy and D. Pixley, the former a Baptist and the latter a Presbyterian missionary to the Indians. Clay County. The arrival of the saints in Clay County was a blessing to the inhabitants, who had just opened small prairie farms and planted them with Indian corn, much of which was unharvested. They had cattle on the bottoms and hogs in the woods. The majority of the people received the saints with gladness and gave them employment, and paid them in corn, pork, and beef. The wages were low, but sufficient to supply the more pressing wants of the people. From time to time, Joseph Smith forwarded money from Kirtland to Bishop Partridge to supply the most needy. The mob in Jackson County sent committees to stir up the feelings of the people of Clay against the saints. For some time, their oft-repeated efforts to do so were unsuccessful. Parties of the mob would come over from Jackson and seize our brethren and inflict violence upon them. The industry of our people soon enabled them to make some purchases of land, and then our numbers were increased by arrivals from the east. The mob of Jackson County continued their endeavors to stir up dissatisfaction among the people of Clay County against the saints. At length, the citizens of Clay County held a public meeting and requested the Mormons to seek another home. When the saints located in the new county of Caldwell, which contained only 7 families, who were bee hunters, as the county was mostly prairie, their business was not very profitable, and they gladly embraced the opportunity of selling their claims. Caldwell County, being nearly destitute of timber, was regarded by the people of Upper Missouri as worthless. Every saint that could raise $50 entered 40 acres of land, and there were but few that could do that much, while many entered large tracts. The saints migrated from the east and settled Caldwell in great numbers. In 3 years, they had built mills, shops, school, meeting and dwelling houses, and opened and fenced hundreds of farms. Our industry and temperance rendered our settlements the most prosperous of any in Missouri, while they embraced all of Caldwell, most of Davis, and large portions of Clinton, Ray, Carroll, and Livingston counties. When the storm of mobocracy was again aroused and aided by the governor of the state, Lilburn W. Boggs, who issued the order expelling the Latter-day Saints from the state under penalty of extermination. This caused the loss of hundreds of lives through violence and suffering. Houses were plundered, women were violated, men were whipped, and a great variety of cruelties inflicted, and a loss of property amounting to millions was sustained, while anyone that would renounce his religion was permitted to remain. Joseph and Hiram Smith, Alexander McRae, Lyman White, and others were for several months thrust into prison, and in one instance while there were fed on human flesh and tantalized with the inquiry how they liked Mormon beef, it being the flesh of some of their murdered brethren. The Lord softened the hearts of the people of Quincy, Illinois, and while the hundreds of saints were fleeing over the snow-clad prairies of Missouri, not knowing where to go, the people of Quincy were holding public meetings, raising subscriptions and adopting measures to give the fugitive employment and succor, for which our hearts overflow with gratitude. As soon as the saints were all expelled from Missouri, Joseph Smith went to Washington and laid the grievances of the people before the President and Congress of the United States. Mr. Van Buren said, "Your cause is just, but we can do nothing for you." Mr. Clay, when appealed to, said we had better go to Oregon. Mr. Calhoun informed Mr. Smith it would involve the question of state rights, and was a dangerous question, and it would not do to agitate it. Mr. Cass, as chairman of the Senate committee to which the petition was referred, reported that Congress had no business with it. Elder John P. Green went east and published an appeal in behalf of the saints, holding public meetings in Cincinnati and New York, and received some small contributions for the assistance of the most needy. As soon as Joseph Smith escaped from Missouri to Illinois, he purchased lands at a place known as Commerce, in Hancock County, and commenced the survey of a city which he called Nauvoo, the word being derived from the Hebrew, meaning beauty and rest. Although the situation was handsome, it was famed for being unhealthy. There were but few inhabitants in the vicinity, but many graves in the burying ground, and much of the subsequent sickness was the result of exposure and the want of suitable means of nursing the sick. The swamps in the vicinity of Nauvoo were soon drained, and the lands around put under cultivation. Numerous dwellings and several mills were erected, and thrift and prosperity, the invariable results of industry and sobriety, were manifest. Demands were made from Missouri for the persons of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Joseph was arrested and tried at Monmouth before Judge Stephen A. Douglas, and honorably discharged. His principal attorney in this case was Honorable O. H. Browning, now U.S. Secretary of the Interior. This suit cost him upwards of $3,000. He was soon again arrested on a demand from Missouri and discharged by Judge Pope of the U.S. District Court. This time it cost him $12,000. Not long after the second acquittal, he was again arrested in Lee County, Illinois, and an attempt made in the face of the state authorities to kidnap him into Missouri. Nauvoo sent out 300 men and rescued him. He was afterwards discharged by the municipal court of that place, and Thomas Ford, governor of Illinois, sanctioned his discharge. In 1844, Joseph and Hiram were arrested on a charge of treason, under pledge of the executive that they should have a fair trial, but they were murdered by 150 men with blackened faces, merchants and men that we had sustained in business, and apostates took a leading part in bringing this about. Expenses attendant upon the arrest of Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith the prophet was subjected, during his short ministerial career of 15 years, to about 50 vexatious lawsuits. The principal expense was incurred in liquidating lawyers' bills, and the brethren's time and expenditure in attending courts to defend the prophet from mob violence. Magistrates' court expenses were generally $100. The prophet paid Generals Doniphan and Atchison for legal services at Richmond, Missouri, in 1838-39, $16,000, but this amount was fruitlessly expended, as the benefits of the law were not accorded to him because of the predominance of the overruling power of a mob. At the prophet's trial in Monmouth, Illinois, in 1841 before Judge Douglas, the lawyer's fees and expenses amounted to $3,000. His next trial was before Judge Pope, U.S. District Court, in 1842-43, the expenses of which may be reasonably estimated at $12,000. Cyrus Walker charged $10,000 for defending Joseph in his political arrest, or the attempt at kidnapping him in Dixon, Illinois, in 1843. There were 4 other lawyers employed for the defense besides Walker. The expenses of the defense of his trial were enormous, involving amounts incurred by the horse companies who went in pursuit to aid Joseph, and the trip of the steamer Maid of Iowa from Nauvoo to Ottawa, and may be fairly estimated at $100,000. When the mantle of Joseph Smith fell upon Brigham Young, the enemies of God and his kingdom sought to inaugurate a similar career for President Young. But he took his revolver from his pocket at the public stand in Nauvoo, and declared that the first attempt of an officer to read a writ to him in a state that had violated its plighted faith in the murder of the prophet and patriarch while under arrest, he should serve the contents of this writ, holding his loaded revolver in his hand, first. To this vast congregation assembled said, Amen. He was never arrested. Appeal to the governors of the states. In 1845, the storm of mobocracy raging around us, we sent an appeal to the President of the United States, and the governor of every state in the Union except Missouri, of which the following, addressed to Governor Drew of Arkansas, is a copy to the governor, he being the only one from whom an answer was received. To His Excellency Thomas S. Drew, Governor of Arkansas, Nauvoo, Illinois, May 1st, 1845. Honorable Sir, suffer us, sir, in behalf of a disenfranchised and long-afflicted people, to prefer a few suggestions for your serious consideration, in hope of a friendly and unequivocal response, at as early a period as may suit your convenience, and the extreme urgency of the case seems to demand. It is not our present design to detail the multiplied and aggravated wrongs that we have received in the midst of a nation that gave us birth. Some of us have long been loyal citizens of the state over which you have an honor to preside, while others claim citizenship in each of the states of this great confederacy. We say we are a disenfranchised people. We are privately told by the highest authorities of this state that it is neither prudent nor safe for us to vote at the polls. Still, we have continued to maintain our right to vote, until the blood of our best men have been shed, both in Missouri and in the state of Illinois, with impunity. You are doubtless somewhat familiar with the history of our extermination from the state of Missouri, wherein scores of our brethren were massacred, hundreds died through want and sickness, and occasioned by their unparalleled sufferings. Some millions of our property were confiscated or destroyed, and some 15,000 souls fled for their lives to the then hospitable and peaceful shores of Illinois, and that the state of Illinois granted to us a liberal charter for the term of perpetual succession, and under its provision, private rights have become invested, and the largest city in the state has grown up, numbering about 20,000 inhabitants. But, sir, the startling attitude recently assumed by the state of Illinois forbids us to think that her designs are any less vindictive than those of Missouri. She has already used the military of the state, with the executive at their head, to coerce and surrender up our best men to unparalleled murder, and that, too, under the most sacred pledges of protection and safety. As a salve for such unearthly perfidy and guilt, she told us, through her highest executive officer, that the laws should be magnified, and that the murderers brought to justice. But the blood of her innocent victims had not been wholly wiped from the floor of the awful arena, where the citizens of a sovereign state pounced upon two defenseless servants of God, our prophet and our patriarch, before the Senate of that state rescued one of the indicated actors in that mournful tragedy from the sheriff of Hancock County, and gave him an honorable seat in her halls of legislation, and all others who were indicted by the grand jury of Hancock County for the murders of Generals Joseph and Hiram Smith are suffered to roam at large, watching for further prey. To crown the climax of these bloody deeds, the state has repealed all those chartered rights by which we might have defended ourselves against aggressors. If we defend ourselves hereafter against violence, whether it comes under the show of law or otherwise, for we have reason to expect it both ways, we shall then be charged with treason and suffer the penalty. And if we continue passive and non-resistant, we must certainly expect to perish, for our enemies have sworn it. And here, sir, permit us to state that General Joseph Smith, during his short life, was arraigned at the bar of his country about 50 times, charged with criminal offenses, but was acquitted every time by his country, or rather his religious opponents almost invariably being his judges. And we further testify that as a people we are law-abiding, peaceable, and without crimes, and we challenge the world to prove the contrary. And while other less cities in Illinois have had special courts instituted to try their criminals, we have been stripped of every source of arraigning marauders and murderers who are prowling around to destroy us, except the common magistracy. With these facts before you, sir, will you write to us without delay as a father and friend and advise us what to do? We are, many of us, citizens of your state, and all members of the same great confederacy. Our fathers, nay, some of us, have fought and bled for our country, and we love her dearly. In the name of Israel's God, and by virtue of multiplied ties of country and kindred, we ask your friendly interposition in our favor. Will it be too much to ask you to convene a special session of your state legislature, and furnish us an asylum where we can enjoy our rights of conscience and religion unmolested? Or will you, in a special message to that body when convened, recommend a remonstrance against such unhallowed acts of oppression and expatriation as this people have continued to receive from the state of Missouri and Illinois? Or will you favor us by your personal influence and by your official rank? Or will you express your views concerning what is called the Great Western Measure of colonizing the Latter-day Saints in Oregon, the Northwestern Territory, or some location remote from the states, where the hand of oppression shall not crush every noble principle and extinguish every patriotic feeling? And now, honored sir, having reached out our imploring hands to you with deep solemnity, we would importune you as a father, a friend, a patriot, a statesman, by the Constitution of American liberty, by the blood of our fathers who have fought for the independence of this republic, by the blood of the martyrs which have been shed in our midst, by the wailings of the widows and orphans, by our murdered fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, wives and children, by the dread of immediate destruction from secret combination now forming for our overthrow, and by every endearing tie that binds men to men and renders life bearable, and that too, for aught we know, for the last time, that you will lend your immediate aid to quell the violence of mobocracy, and exert your influence to establish us as a people in our civil and religious rights, where we now are, or in some part of the United States, or at some place remote therefrom, where we may colonize in peace and safety, as soon as circumstances will permit. We sincerely hope that your future prompt measures towards us will be dictated by the best feelings that dwell in the bosom of humanity, and the blessings of a grateful people and of many ready to perish shall come upon you. We are, sir, with great respect, your obedient servants, Brigham Young, Chairman, W. Richards, Orson Spencer, Orson Pratt, Committee, W. W. Phelps, A. W. Babbitt, John M. Bernhiesel, in behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at Nauvoo, Illinois. P.S. As many of our communications postmarked at Nauvoo have failed of their destination, and the mails around us have been intercepted by our enemies, we shall send this to some distant office by the hand of a special messenger. The following reply was received from Governor Drew. Executive Office, Little Rock, Arkansas, May 27, 1845. Honorable Brigham Young, President of the Committee of 12 of Christ's Church of Latter-day Saints at Nauvoo, Illinois. Sir, your letter of the 1st instant has been received and claims my earnest attention. I must acknowledge my inability to serve your people by calling an extra session of the General Assembly of this state for the object contemplated, and although I do not know that prejudice against your tenants in Arkansas would weigh aught against the action of that body, in refusing to furnish within our borders an asylum from the oppression of which you so sorely complain, yet I am sure the representatives of the people would long hesitate to extend to any class of citizens exclusive privileges, however innocent their motives, aims, objects, or actions might appear, when the prospects of collision, from causes of which in your case I know nothing, appear so evident, from the 2 very recent manifestations presented in the states of Missouri and Illinois. I have no doubt Illinois, prompted by the kindest of sympathies for your people in the late struggle and overthrow they encountered in Missouri, extended a liberal helping hand, but to repent her supposed folly. Could Arkansas, after witnessing the same scene reenacted in Illinois, calculate on anything short of a like catastrophe? I am not sufficiently informed of the course taken against you by the authorities of the states of Illinois, and difficulties detailed in your communication to justify a recommendation from me to the legislature to remonstrate against the acts of Illinois, the detailed statement of facts afforded me by your communication being of an ex parte character. But were I regularly informed of all facts from both parties and felt able to form a correct opinion as to the justice of the course pursued by the state of Illinois, yet I am of opinion that this state would not have, nor would I have as its chief executive officer, the right to interfere in the least with the internal concerns or police of the state of Illinois, or of any other neighboring state, where its operations do not distract in any way affect the good order of the citizens of the state of Arkansas. There are instances, but they are rare, where the interposition of one state to arrest the progress of violence in another would be at all admissible, such, for instance, as where the public authorities of the state affected all palpably incompetent to quell an insurrection within her limits, and the violence is likely to extend its ravages and bad influence to such neighboring state, or where a proper call had been made for succor. Nor can I afford to exercise my official rank as chief executive of this state in behalf of a faction in a neighboring state, and I humbly conceive that my personal influence would add nothing to your cause, unless it should prove to be a just one, in which event public opinion will afford you support of a character more lasting in the eye of an enlightened public, than wiser and greater men than your humble servant, than official rank, or force backed by power. It is true that while prejudice may have the ascendancy over the minds of the neighboring community, your people may be exposed more or less to loss of life and destruction of property. I therefore heartily agree with you in the proposed plan of emigration to the Oregon Territory, or to California, the north of Texas, or to Nebraska, thereby placing your community beyond the reach of contention, until, at least, you shall have had time and opportunity to test the practicability of your system, and to develop its contemplated superior advantages in ameliorating the condition of the human race, and adding to the blessings of civil and religious liberty, that such a community, constituted as yours, with the mass of prejudice which surrounds and obstructs its progress at this time, cannot prosper that in that or any of the neighboring states, appears very evident from the signal failures upon 2 occasions under auspices at least as favorable as you could reasonably expect from any of the states. My personal sympathies are strong for the oppressed, though my official station can know nothing but what is sanctioned by the strictest justice, and that circumscribed to the limited jurisdiction of my own state. And while I deplore, as a man and a philanthropist, your distressed situation, I would refer you to the emphatic and patriarchal proposition of Abraham to Lot, and whilst I allude to the eloquent paraphrase of one of Virginia's most gifted sons, wherein he circumscribed the bounds of our dominion within the great valley of the Mississippi, I would only add that the way is now open to the Pacific without let or hindrance. Should the Latter-day Saints migrate to Oregon, they will carry with them the goodwill of philanthropists, and the blessing of every friend of humanity. If they are wrong, their wrongs will be abated with many degrees of allowance, and if right, will afford an opportunity to make it manifest in due season to the whole civilized world. With my hearty desires for your peace and prosperity, I subscribe myself respectfully yours, Thomas S. Drew. This correspondence shows us the necessity of our being united in sustaining the Latter-day Saints, that we may not build up, by our own acts, a power to renew persecution again in our midst. Expulsion from Illinois. In September 1845, the mob commenced burning the houses of the Saints in the southern part of the county of Hancock, and continued until stopped by the sheriff, who summoned a posse comitatus. While few but the Latter-day Saints would serve under him, the governor sent troops and disbanded the posse. The murderers of Joseph and Hiram had a sham trial and were acquitted. A convention of 9 counties notified us that we must leave the state. The governor informed us, through General John J. Harding and Honorable Stephen A. Douglas, that we could not be protected in Illinois. We commenced our emigration west on the 6th of February, 1846. During that month, some 1,200 wagons crossed the Mississippi, many of them on ice. Everybody that was able to leave continued to do so until late in the summer, and the outfits with which they were left were insufficient, while the winter and spring weather was inclement, which caused a great deal of suffering. While the strength of Israel had gone westward, the Illinois mob commenced their hostilities in redoubled fury. They whipped, plundered, and murdered men, abused women and children, and drove all the scattering ones into Nauvoo, then laid siege to the place and bombarded it for 3 days, killing several persons and wounding others, and peremptorily expelled the remainder across the river into Iowa, after robbing them of the remainder of their property they possessed, and leaving them on the shore to perish. Their encampment was probably one of the most miserable and distressed that ever existed. All who were able, by any possible means, had got away, and those left were the poor and the helpless. Great numbers were sick, and they were without tents or conveniences of any kind to make them comfortable. Encamped on the foggy bottoms of the Mississippi River, they were scorched with fevers, without medicine or proper food. In this helpless condition, a merciful Providence smiled on them by sending quails, so tame that many caught them with their hands. Yet many perished within sight of hundreds of houses belonging to them and their friends, which were under the dominion of Reverend Thomas S. Brockman and his mob legions, who viciously trampled the Constitution and the laws of Illinois and the laws of humanity under their feet. The victims continued to suffer until the camps in the West sent them relief. For a more full description of these scenes, I read from the historical address of Colonel, now General, Thomas L. Kane, who was an eye-witness. "A few years ago," said Colonel Kane, "ascending the upper Mississippi in the autumn when its waters were low, I was compelled to travel by land past the region of the rapids. My road lay through the half-breed tract, a fine section of Iowa, which the unsettled state of its land titles had appropriated as a sanctuary for coiners, horse thieves, and other outlaws. I had left my steamer at Keokuk, at the foot of the lower fall, to hire a carriage, and to contend for some fragments of a dirty meal with the swarming flies, the only scavenger of the locality. From this place to where the deep water of the river returns, my eye wearied to see everywhere sordid, vagabond, and idle settlers, and a county marred without being improved by their careless hands. I was descending the last hillside upon my journey when a landscape in delightful contrast broke upon my view. Half encircled by a bend in the river, a beautiful city lay glittering in the fresh morning sun, its bright new dwellings set in cool green gardens, ranging up around a stately dome-shaped hill, which was crowned by a noble edifice whose high tapering spire was radiant with white and gold. The city appeared to cover several miles, and beyond it, in the background, there rolled off a fair country, checkered by the careful lines of fruitful husbandry. The unmistakable marks of industry, enterprise, and educated wealth everywhere made the scene one of singular and most striking beauty. It was a natural impulse to visit this inviting region. I procured a skiff, and rowing across the river, landed at the chief wharf of the city. No one met me there. I looked and saw no one. I could hear no one move, though the quiet everywhere was such that I heard flies buzz, and the water ripples break against the shallow of the beach. I walked through the solitary street. The town lay as in a dream, under some deadening spell of loneliness, from which I almost feared to wake it, for plainly it had not slept long. There was no grass growing upon the paved way. Rains had not entirely washed away the prints of dusty footsteps. Yet I went about unchecked. I went into empty workshops, rope walks, and smithies. The spinner's wheel was idle. The carpenter had gone from his workbench and shavings, his unfinished sash and casing. Fresh bark was in the tanner's vat, and the fresh chopped lightwood stood piled against the baker's oven. The blacksmith's shop was cold, but his coal heap and lading pool and crooked water horn were all there, as if he had just gone off on a holiday. No work people anywhere looked to know my errand. If I went into the gardens, clinking the wicket latch loudly after me to pull the marigolds, heartsease, and lady slippers, and draw a drink with the water-sodden well bucket and its noisy chain, or, knocking off with my stick the tall, heavy-headed dahlias and sunflowers, hunted over the beds for cucumbers and love apples, no one called out to me from any opened window, or dog sprang forth to bark in alarm. I could have supposed the people hidden in the houses, but the doors were unfastened, and when at last I timidly entered them, I found dead ashes upon the hearths, and had to tread a tiptoe as if walking down the aisle of a country church, to avoid rousing irreverent echoes from the naked floors. On the outskirts of town was the city graveyard, but there was no record of plague there, nor did it in any wise differ from other Protestant American cemeteries. Some of the mounds were not long sodded, some of the stones were newly set, their dates recent, and their black inscriptions glossy on the mason's hardly dried lettering ink. Beyond the graveyard, out in the fields, I saw in one spot hard by where the fruited boughs of a young orchard had been roughly torn down, the still smoldering remains of a barbecue fire that had been constructed of rails from the fencing around it. It was the latest sign of life there. Fields upon fields of heavy-headed yellow grain lay rotting ungathered upon the ground. No one was there to take in their rich harvest. As far as the eye could reach they stretched away, they sleeping too in the hazy air of autumn. Only two portions of the city seemed to suggest the import of this mysterious solitude. On the southern suburb, the houses looking out upon the country showed, by their splintering woodwork and walls battered to the foundation, that they had lately been the mark of a destructive cannonade. And in and around the splendid temple, which had been the chief object of my admiration, armed men were barracked, surrounded by their stacks of musketry and pieces of heavy ordnance. These challenged me to render an account of myself, and why I had had the temerity to cross the water without written permit from a leader of their band. Though these men were generally more or less under the influence of ardent spirits, after I had explained myself as a passing stranger, they seemed anxious to gain my good opinion. They told the story of the dead city, that it had been a notable manufacturing and commercial mart, sheltering over 20,000 persons, that it had waged war with its inhabitants for several years, and had been finally successful only a few days before my visit, in an action fought in front of the ruined suburb, after which they had driven them forth at the point of the sword. The defense, they said, had been obstinate, but gave way on the third day's bombardment. They boasted greatly of their prowess, especially in this battle, as they called it, but I discovered that they were not of one mind as to certain of the exploits that had distinguished it, one of which, as I remember, was that they had slain a father and his son, a boy of 15, not long residents of the fated city, whom they admitted to have borne a character without reproach. They also conducted me inside the massive sculptured walls of the curious temple, in which they said the banished inhabitants were accustomed to celebrate the mystic rites of an unhallowed worship. They particularly pointed out to me certain features of the building which, having been the peculiar objects of a former superstitious regard, they had, as a matter of duty, sedulously defiled and defaced. The reputed sites of certain shrines they had thus particularly noticed, and various sheltered chambers, in one of which was a deep well, constructed, they believe, with a dreadful design. Besides these, they led me to see a large and deep-chiseled marble vase or basin, supported upon 12 oxen, also of marble, and of the size of life, of which they told some romantic stories. They said the deluded persons, most of whom were immigrants from a great distance, believed their deity countenanced their reception here of a baptism of regeneration, as proxies, for whomsoever they held in warm affection in the countries from which they had come. That here parents went into the water for their lost children, children for their parents, widows for their spouses, and young persons for their lovers, that thus the great vase came to be for them associated with all dear and distant memories, and was therefore the object of all others in the building, to which they attached the greatest degree of idolatrous affection. On this account the victors had so diligently desecrated it as to render the apartment in which it was contained too noisome to abide in. They permitted me also to ascend into the steeple, to see where it had been lightning struck the Sabbath before, and to look out east and south on wasted farms like those I had seen near the city, extending till they were lost in the distance. Here, in the face of the pure day, close to the scar of the divine wrath left by the thunderbolt, were fragments of food, cruises of liquor, and broken drinking vessels, with a bass drum and a steamboat signal bell, of which I afterwards learned the use was pain. It was after nightfall when I was ready to cross the river on my return. The wind had freshened since the sunset, and the water beating roughly into my little boat, I edged higher up the stream than the point I had left in the morning, and I landed where a faint glimmering light invited me to steer. Here, among the dock and rushes, sheltered only by the darkness, without roof, between them and the sky, I came upon a crowd of several hundred human beings, whom my movements roused from uneasy slumber on the ground. Passing these on my way to the light, I found it came from a tallow candle on a paper funnel shade, such as is used by street vendors of apples and peanuts, and which, flaming and guttering away in the bleak air off the water, shone flickeringly on the emaciated features of a man in the last stage of a bilious remittent fever. They had done their best for him. Over his head was something like a tent, made of a sheet or two, and he rested on a partially ripped open old straw mattress, with a hair sofa cushion under his bed for a pillow. His gaping jaw and glazing eye told how short a time he would monopolize these luxuries, though a seemingly bewildered and excited person, who might have been his wife, seemed to find hope in occasionally forcing him to swallow awkwardly sips of the tepid river water, from a burned and battered, bitter-smelling tin coffee pot. Those who knew better had furnished the apothecary he needed a toothless old bald head, whose manners had the repulsive dullness of a man familiar with death scenes. He, so long as I remained, mumbled in his patient's ear a monotonous and melancholy prayer, between the pauses of which I heard the hiccup and sobbing of two little girls, who were sitting upon a piece of driftwood outside. Dreadful indeed was the suffering of those forsaken beings, and cramped with a cold and sunburn, alternating as each weary day and night dragged on, and they were, almost all of them, the crippled victims of disease. They were there because they had no homes, nor hospital, nor poorhouse, nor friends to offer them any. They could not satisfy the feeble cravings of their sick, and they had not bread to quiet the fractious hunger cries of their children. Mothers and babes, daughters and grandparents, all of them alike were bivouacked in tatters, wanting even covering to comfort those whom the sick shiver of fever was searching to the marrow. These were Mormons in Lee County, Iowa, in the 4th week of the month of September, in the year of our Lord, 1846. The city, it was Nauvoo, Illinois. The Mormons were the owners of that city, and the smiling country around, and those who had stopped their plows, who had silenced their hammers, their axes, their shuttles, and their workshop wheels, those who had put out their fires, who had eaten their food, spoiled their orchards, and trampled underfoot their thousands of acres of unharvested bread. These were the keepers of their dwellings, the carousers in their temple, whose drunken riot insulted the ears of the dying. I think it was as I turned from the wretched night watch of which I have spoken that I first listened to the sounds of revel of a party of the guard within the city. Above the distant hum of voices of many, occasionally rose distinct the loud, oath-tainted exclamation and falsely intonated scrap of vulgar song, but lest this requiem should go unheeded, every now and then, when their boisterous orgies strove to attain a sort of ecstatic climax, a cruel spirit of insulting frolic carried some of them up into the high belfry of the temple steeple, and there, with the wicked childishness of inebriates, they whooped and shrieked and beat the drum that I had seen, and rang in chivalric unison their loud-tongued steamboat bell. They were, all told, not more than 640 persons who were thus lying on the river flats, but the Mormons in Nauvoo and its dependencies had been numbered the year before at over 20,000. Where were they? They had last been seen carrying in mournful train their sick and wounded, halt and blind, to disappear behind the western horizon, pursuing the phantom of another home. Hardly anything else was known to them, and people asked with curiosity what had been their fate, what their fortunes.